Hello and welcome to A Gypsy's Kiss, the vlog. I'm Shelley Carney.
And I'm Toby Eunice. Stick with us a couple of seconds and we'll tell you about the Gospels according to Forrest Fenn.
And we're back. So, as you know, we'll be doing a presentation today about the Gospels of Forrest Fenn, and then we'll be following that up with questions.
Sounds almost like a homily.
And answers, and I have to turn my volume off there. Questions and answers about today's topic.
Followed by questions and answers.
Right.
Yeah.
And as you can see in the chat, we are asking for a volunteer to be chat moderator, just to keep an eye on things. That way, if anybody's out there being rude and trolling.
I'm going to make a quick adjustment of the camera here.
Then we can have you take care of that for us in case we miss it. Thirdly, Super Chat. Super Chat is available if you want to have your comment come to the top. You can put some money on it. It pops up. It's got a cool box around it. And then we'll pay attention to everything you say within that chat for that day as well. If you don't want to do that, but you want to send us money, do we have our address in the description box still?
The snail mail address?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Send it to our snail mail or send us a gift. If you want to send us money, but you don't want to give money to YouTube, I don't know why, but you can do it that way.
Well, we can also give them a PayPal account. I guess I should start posting the PayPal account, didn't I?
Sure. You know, because I need money. I don't know about anybody
Christmas
else.
is coming up and I need
Christmas
money.
is coming. I'm just kidding. I never needed money. I'm independently wealthy. Begin your on-topic question with AGK.
You should be so lucky.
Again, in the chat, I wrote that so that if it's to us, write AGK : and then I'll see it. Otherwise, I might miss it. But if you just want to talk to each other, that's fine too, and you don't have to do that.
Chatting with each other.
Yeah. And make sure you share our live stream with your friends and get it out, get the word out there so that more people will join us for the chat.
Nice.
Okay.
Do you have a moderator yet?
Let me see. Chat. Joel Lewicki.
Joel,
Okay.
you want to moderate?
Joel?
All right. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to block any trolls that come in and try to disrupt what Shelley is trying to accomplish here.
So, yes. So you now have authority as chat administrator.
And
Joel.
be judicious. Right?
Yeah, don't.
Sometimes people say
You don't
things
have to make a
Sometimes people say things
mountain out of a molehill.
that are controversial but not trollish. So it's okay to say stuff that's controversial. We like that, as a matter of fact, especially when they come in the form of questions. Okay, you got that?
Yes, I'm just.
Tell me when I can start.
Go ahead.
All right. So what I want to talk about today is Forrest's new book, Once Upon a While, and my perception of what the book is and does. And although I'm not necessarily a religious person, although I did attend Catholic schools for a significant part of my life, I am not a religious person. I'm not a person who studies the Bible unless I'm doing some sort of research and have to go to the Bible. But as I went through each one of the 39 chapters, I realized that Forrest was trying to accomplish something here. And that's what I want to talk about today. So we went through the book. We reviewed the entire book and spent a lot of time talking about it. And there are a lot of things that we could talk about. And it's going to take multiple shows to accomplish all of that. But the things that we want to talk about today, there's three of them. Number one, I want to talk about the print faults because I got several emails and several comments about the print faults in the book. The fact that there is text on some pages that is lighter than the text, the remainder of the text on the page. And there's actually an explanation for that. So I want to talk about that first, and then I want to talk about our perceptions of how Fenn structured this book, and most importantly, why he structured it the way that he did. And then finally, I want to talk about what I think is the most important part of the book, and that is Douglas Preston's foreword. So let's start with the print faults. As you can see, I tried to collect an image of it right here. The print faults are changes in the density of the ink on the page. And someone had mentioned that they saw several of them throughout the book. And my first reaction was to look for a pattern. And there are actually two patterns related to this. The first one starts on page 11, and I think that particular image that I show you came from page 11. The second pattern starts at 25, and here's what I mean by pattern. It is not a set of clues. I don't believe it's a set of clues. I don't believe it's going to help you get closer to the treasure. To me, as I analyzed, it's the problem of the printing press and the printing process. And the reason I figured that out is if you start at page 11 and start counting 16 pages, when you get to page 27, you're going to see almost in exactly the same location, the same print fault. And let me see if I can do this quickly to kind of give you an idea of how that all works. So what you can do is you can open up to your page 11, you'll see the print fault here, and then go to page, in this case, 25, but it's the same thing. And the print fault is in exactly the same location. The reason that occurs is because not because it's a problem of how they wrote it. It's really a problem associated with the print press. And the reason I know that is if you count 16 pages from page 11, you'll get to page 27, the same print fault. And if you go through the entire book, starting at page 11, counting 16 pages, you'll see exactly the same print fault, except on those pages on which an image has been printed. And that, of course, is a different part of the press and a different structure because it has color to it. In addition to that, there was a second pattern that began at page 25. And again, if you count the 16 pages, and the reason 16 pages is important is that's how a book is assembled. They print 16 pages at a time, front and back, and they cut that and fold it, and they fold it in, you can see it in the binding. It is bound in that way. And that's why you can see it every 16 pages again, beginning at page 11, and then beginning again at page 25. The only ones that you won't see it on are the pages that have images. But it's contiguous all the way through the end of the book on those pages. And as I said, exactly on the same location on the page. So I wanted to get that out of the way really quick because I didn't see it as any kind of opportunity. And Tom, that was for you. You were the first one that, Tom K., you brought it to you were the first one to bring it to my attention, and then several others followed up with the same thing. So there's your answer to that. So let's go on to the Gospel according to Forrest Fenn. So we read the book, and because it was our first reading, we ignored the details. I don't go back and make notes like this and highlights in the book until I've read it 2 or 3 times, just kind of like Forrest recommends, read the book and then go back and look for stuff, you know. I do that whatever the research is. I ignored the details, and it is in my nature as an analyst to look for the what I refer to and what are referred to as the grand patterns, the big patterns that are common that you can identify as common throughout the book, especially patterns that indicate behaviors, because almost everything that is produced by someone is an indication in some ways of their behaviors. And because this is Fenn's writing in Fenn's book, and there are patterns of behavior incorporated therein. So it's important to get those out of the way. But the real question I wanted to answer for myself, if not for the community, was why, the why question. And the why question in this case was, why was this book published? I mean, he didn't have to. There wasn't any more need for clues. All the clues have been, are in the book and the poem, etc., etc. So, and Shelley will tell you that when we talk about interviews, we always avoid using why questions, why and why not questions, because they're intrusive. But that shouldn't prevent you from doing the Socratic or Platonic question, which is why, in this case, was this book written? And I think that's an important question, because I think it provides perspective for us on some of the things that you're going to find in the book.
Mm-hmm.
So why was this book published? Well, was it published to increase Fenn's net worth? No, as in all the books since The Thrill of the Chase, and there could have been others, but certainly we know from The Thrill of the Chase, the profits, the proceeds from the book go to someone other than Fenn. In this case, Susan and Lou were mentioned. I imagine Jessica, because our friend Jessica Jenkins, because she did the editing, probably gets a piece of that action, but it certainly doesn't go to Fenn. So it's not, there's no sense that he's making money from it. The second thing is, does it add to Fenn's body of work? And the simple answer to that is no, it doesn't, because these are scrapbooks that have already been published. What is arguably the most visible blog when it comes, Dale Neitzel's blog, when it comes to the treasure hunt. They've all been published as scrapbooks on those pages. And there were only minor changes. There are edits to them. Jessica re-edited them with Fenn's approval. But they're all up there. So it's not necessarily adding to the body of work. The difference is that body of work is in digital form, electrons, and this one is atoms, physical form. So it has the potential for increasing the body of work in the sense that it's in another location. If the physical, it can be acquired physically and transported physically and shared physically, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last one was the idea to provide more hints and clues to the search community. If it was, you would have already found them. They would have been identified and argued and debated over, and honestly they are argued and debated over once the scrapbooks were published. So you don't need this book to find out whether or not there are additional hints or clues in the book.
It's all out there already. You
That's
don't
right.
have to buy the book. It's just if you want it all in one place.
Yeah, and if you want to play with it. Now, the caveat is that while I don't think that Fenn consciously published this book to increase the amount of cluage out there, I think that Preston wrote it with kind of the opposite intent. I think that Preston wrote wrote the foreword in order to imply that he was presenting additional clues and hints. And I don't think it's a financial thing for Preston, because again, the money's not going to Forrest. I think it's just Douglas Preston. He's a writer, and he's got a great imagination, as you can tell by his the number of New York Times bestseller fiction novels he's written.
He probably just wants to say, look, this book sold more because I wrote the foreword.
Yeah, and it could very well be just
I mean,
that.
I'd do that.
Yeah. And then, of course, he reinforced it at the Collected Works book signing when he literally looked Forrest in the eye and said, Forrest told me not to say this, and then looked at the audience and said, there are clues in this book. And at that point, Forrest rolled his eyes. But I think there is an undercurrent of active writer's imagination in all of it. And I believe there is something, and we're going to talk about that towards the end of today's presentation, there is something in the foreword. So the three big hints that pointed me in this direction, and actually there's four because Shelley brought one up this morning that I thought was really important. But the three big hints that I thought pointed me in the direction of this idea that these are the Gospels of Forrest, according to Forrest Fenn. The first one was the original title of the book, as it was written by Fenn. And you can find an image of that. Do I have a...
Mm-hmm. It's a little further along.
Oh, I didn't. You know what? I didn't change it. The three big hints are the original title of the book is written by Fenn. Once in a while, I do something right. The second big hint is the 39 scrapbooks that Fenn selected to include in the book. And the third big hint, did I just say third twice? The first hint, second hint, third hint, the one scrapbook that was excluded. So I'm going to go here because I put a picture. I forgot to take out that slide. So I have an extra slide in there. So if you can find it, there's a picture on the internet of a poster image, an image of a poster that was taken at Fenbury. I don't know who takes credit for it, and I'm sorry if I knew, I'd give you credit for it. But it's a picture of a poster describing or announcing the fact that another book was coming out. So Fenbury was in June of this year. So they announced it, and the title on that poster is different. The title on that poster is "Once in a While, I Do Something Right." And a subtitle is things discovered along the way. And to me, that made it very personal in a lot of different senses. And it also defined exactly what you incorporate in that book. Again, I think when somebody says something like, well, once in a while, I do something right. You know, if you were to, not you, but if you were to stand there and list all the things that I do wrong, which is a lengthy list, actually, when you think about it.
Well, I don't think so.
At some point, I would listen. And I would look for reaffirmation that we were still okay. And I would say to you, but yeah, once in a while I do something right.
Even a blind squirrel finds an acorn now and then.
Exactly, something like that. You know, something that says, but
even a broken
I'm
watch is right twice a day.
And that's what that phrase does. When I ask you, once in a while I do something right, it's a way to correct a misconception or a misrepresentation that you may have of me, and because I care about that person, about you, and Fenn cares about us, he doesn't want you to think negatively of him. So that's what the title indicated to me. And then the other thing that it does is it ends that debate. It's a good, when I say to you, well, yeah, but isn't there something that I do right, or don't you like this part of me, or I'm a squirrel and I'll find an acorn one day.
You're a broken clock.
Yeah,
and you're
I'm
right
a broken
twice
clock.
a day.
I'm right twice a day. All of those euphemisms for exactly that.
Yeah.
It stops the part of the debate where I have to defend all the bad things about me, and it starts a new one.
Well, you're accepting. You're saying, let's take the good with the bad. Let's not just focus on the bad. Let's focus on something good too.
And that's the beginning of the new, it may not even be a debate. It's a conversation, but it's a good way to do that. And that's what that title does, and perhaps I believe that's what this book was intended to do. So the second thing is the 39 included scrapbooks. So what I noticed about them is they all had common characteristics. They are basically parables. And Shelley, I didn't include this, but Shelley mentioned this morning because she had noticed it. I hadn't. But if you look at the, what do they call these?
Dedication.
Dedication in the book, written by Fenn. It's not his handwriting, but he wrote it. And it says, "To all of my experiences, both good and bad, you taught me so much." And it was a recognition that these 39 stories that he put in there were basically stories of events, good and bad, from which he learned. And he writes them, if you look at them, he writes them in the form of parables, where he tells the story and then he summarizes it, giving you the opportunity to think about it and perhaps even to apply something similar in your life. And that's very much in line with the Gospels and how the various writers of the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, wrote the stories of Christ in the form of parables, because there's some sense there is a Socratic basis for that, where Socrates wanted us to learn from asking questions about ourselves.
It's a rabbi method.
Oh, Rabbi Socrates.
They ask, every question is met with another question. Right.
And so it's a good way to do that, because each one of these parables ends with a thought that is meant to entice you into thinking about it. And if you look at it that way, it's really a different reading of the book. I mean, I'm not looking for clues. I'm not looking for hints. I'm not the mercenary Toby that has to find that treasure. I'm looking at it and hopefully learning from Forrest Fenn's 87 years worth of experience. And you've got to admit, because of the life he's led, he's not only led a challenging life, but an interesting one and a very learned one. I mean, you've got to respect how much this man knows and how much he's learned about himself through these events that he's documented in his life. So he goes on and he talks about the parables, these allegories that teach a truth, and then I noticed that each one of the stories could, if you chose, leave the reader with what is effectively a one-word description of Fenn's character. No, I didn't say that right. A one-word characteristic that applies to Fenn. And I think that's what he would want out of it. I think he would want you, they're positive, right? They're positive characteristics, and that's how we all want to be viewed, especially in light of that you've selected these stories to tell. So I took the first three just because the first three of the stories in the book are very diverse. They're spread all over, especially the second one, or the one where he talks about spices. But when I went back and read them from the perspective of telling parables and learning, identifying a characteristic, I could honestly go back, read that chapter, and come to the conclusion that the parable told here is, and this is the one, the supplemental punishment, where he washes, his father asks him to wash the supper dishes, and he ends up singing at the top of his lungs, and he finds it so enjoyable that he offers to do it in the future, and his father no longer uses it as a punishment, basically because he's having way too much fun with it. So the parable to be learned is even in hardship, and he has in his life, if you think about it, experienced a lot of hardship. He's had a lot of good times, but his early life was a lot of hardship. You know, it wasn't. Maybe it was a middle class life back then, but it was a difficult middle class life. You know, he tells the story later on in the book how he used his Red Ryder BB gun to go shoot starlings to get dinner for his family. I don't know necessarily that was what they had to do in order to eat, but ask yourself this: when was the last time you walked outside your house and started shooting creatures in order to feed your family? And the characteristic that I saw in this particular parable was the characteristic of optimism. And one of the characteristics that you see in Fenn is this, you know, this continuity of optimism. He learns from the negative, he sees the negative, and he transforms it into the positive. That's a person who's constantly optimistic. And sometimes to a fault. I think you can be overly optimistic and not recognize the reality of your situation, but optimism is a good characteristic to have, and I think that's what can be learned. If you look at the long jump, the second of these two, and like I said, I just did the first three, the parable is everyone has to find themselves in their own way. Each of us goes through this as we go on through life. Eventually, you do that one thing that creates the basis for you moving forward in life. Now, a lot of times it isn't the right thing. A lot of times it's shoplifting your first candy bar, right? Well, that's going to define your life from that point forward. But if it is a good thing, in this case, it was scary. It was nighttime. He was jumping off a 55-foot bridge into water in a river that he couldn't see, and so the parable there is he found himself. He was very comfortable with himself afterwards. He found that it was exciting, and that he didn't, to the extent that he didn't need to brag about it. He didn't need to go back and tell his friends, "Hey, not only did I jump off the bridge, but I jumped off at night." To him, the most important thing was that he had done it. And that's a real sign of self-development, that first steps you take in finding yourself. And I think that's the parable to the story. And then and the characteristic is one of courage, because it took either a bucketful of courage or a bucketful of stupidity to do exactly that. And the difference is he survived, so it had to be courage. If he hadn't survived, it would just be stupidity. So, but I think that's the characteristic that I learned. In the third one, which was really interesting, there's our page 11 with our print fault. because this was the story of the time his wife left the house, and he was somehow prompted by a memory of cooking with his mother and how his mother used the various spices in their home, that they didn't have a lot, salt, pepper, and a couple of others. And so that led him to open up his wife's spice cabinet, herbs and spice cabinet. And in there he discovers 72 bottles, which, by the way, is equally divisible by 3, 6, and 9. And he goes through each one. And now imagine this. You take out a box of spices. There's 72 bottles of spice in there. You sit down. You smell each one. You taste each one enough by putting your finger in the jar and touching it to your tongue. And then you take the time to write notes on what you've discovered. So there's a real research part of this, and it probably is that part of Fenn that is research driven. But that's a lot of time. That's not something you can do in an hour. You would have to sit down for a little while, 2, maybe 3 hours, to go through those 72 bottles, smell each one, determine what you found in the aroma, taste each one, determine what you found in each of the flavors, and then make notes about what you found. What Forrest finds is that his wife has 3 bottles of cloves. And he questions the question at the end of it is, why does my wife have 3 bottles of cloves? The implication being, the parable is, how much do you need to make you happy? When he was growing up, his mother didn't have 72 bottles of cloves.
Or of spices.
I'm sorry, 72 bottles of herbs and spices, and probably not 3 bottles of cloves. So the parable to be learned is, how much do you need in life to be happy? Do you need 3 bottles of cloves to be happy? Or do you do like I do in each Thanksgiving or Easter, when you're making a ham? Not Easter, but when you're making a ham, you have to go to the store because you can't find where you put the last bottle of cloves. And the characteristic that I thought was represented here was that of curiosity. And curiosity is an amazing characteristic, especially when you're 87 years old, because when you're 87 years old, you may have the impression that there's nothing left to learn, that you don't have to learn anything else, that you've learned everything that you need to learn to get at this one.
When he's doing that?
No, one of the things that you're going to find about the postmarks is the postmarks generally are representative, as far as I can tell, for the ones that you can read, are representative of the period in which the event took place.
Okay.
So, and he wasn't 87,
but he was retired, most likely.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact date, but it was after 2000 and something.
Well, and there's, to go along with curiosity and aging, he could have done this as an experiment to say, I'm going to write this down at this age. And then I wonder if 10 years from now, if I'm still alive, will these things still have that kind of a taste or smell to me, or will I be losing my senses?
And that could very well be the kind of research he was doing because of that characteristic of curiosity. Mm-hmm. He didn't do it because he wasn't busy. He did it because he wanted to learn something else. And the next time, I guarantee you that the next time any conversation in any cocktail party where herbs, Toby would walk up and say, "Oh, that's cilantro. I can't put cilantro." I would hear from Forrest about how he feels about coriander and why it's not cilantro, and then a history of how cilantro got into New Mexico, et cetera, et cetera.
It's true. He can have a conversation on
pretty much any topic. That's right. And that's what makes him.
And so can you.
Well, I'm not as good as him. I don't have the same experiences that he has. So anyway, that's what I found about each of the stories. And I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm not even going to make a list of them. I may later write a blog post on what I discovered. What I'm going to recommend to you is go back through the book if you purchase the book. And so I don't want to sound like a Fenn marketing guy. But I would recommend the book. If somebody were to ask me, should I buy the book, I would say yes, if you're buying the book not to find hints and clues. If you're buying the book to look at it from the perspective of what Fenn says in his opening, which is, to all of my experiences, both good and bad, you taught me so much. If you buy the book so that you can learn for yourself what Fenn learned about himself, and see this book from that perspective, then I would suggest buying it.
Well, not only that, but it's only one place, So if you want to read through it, it's all in one place. You don't have to go searching for these particular scrapbooks. And should Dale ever take down his site, you still got this.
Yeah, you still have the book. That's a good point. I know that there are people out there that have copied the scrapbooks and put them in a location where if Dale ever did, in the same way that they've done to some of our videos, if Dale ever did take down his site, you'd be able to find the scrapbooks. But again, I don't think you'll see them because he writes about so many different topics and in different ways. It doesn't have the same reason, the reason why this book was published. The last one is, if you remember correctly, when we were at Collected Works for the book signing event, for the Once Upon a While book signing event, I had the opportunity to ask Forrest why he chose the 39 scrapbooks that he did, and he told the story then. Well, there was actually 40. I wanted an even number. There were actually 40, and I didn't like the last one, or didn't feel like the last one was appropriate. So I went back, I don't know whether he mentioned the scrapbook at the time. Did he?
I don't remember.
The scrapbook number. He said it was about how his writing style. And I was watching Jessica at that point in time, and she was nodding her head as if to say, yeah, that was a battle, but it sounded like she wanted to put it in and make an even number 40. Maybe even Lou and Susan wanted to put it in so that you had that even number. But he said no. And the reason he said no, in my opinion, is that particular scrapbook is parabolic the right word here?
It's not a parable in the same way that the other ones are.
It's not a parable in the same way. It's a learning lesson. It's something like, if you're going to write a memoir, yeah, you got to do what I did, but there's no parable in it, nothing to be learned that's deep.
He's just teaching steps rather than practical steps rather than
it's very
this
practical.
This is how I learned it.
Yeah, and where he learned it from and how he learned it, but there's no life learning lesson here. It would be the equivalent of writing a little note to say, how do you put your show together,
right?
Mm-hmm. And there's no parable or
it's not
allegory
personal.
in it. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's why it didn't make it. That's why 179 didn't make it. Now I went back to the other some of the other scrapbooks that are on Dale's site, and there were some that I thought to myself, they could have made it. But I think what made the ones that he put in interesting was that they were very specifically unique. They covered a single territory in terms of the parable that it wanted to teach and the characteristic that it represented in Fenn. You could look at a lot of them in there and say, optimism, curiosity, courage, and get repetitive. They're not. Each one of them I found had represented a different characteristic of Fenn. And the reason all this becomes so important is because you have often heard us say that in order to find the treasure, you have to understand and solve the poem. And in order to understand and solve the poem, you have to understand and solve Fenn. So what this book, in our opinion, does is provide you an even deeper understanding of Fenn, written after the Once Upon a While, the start of the Once Upon a While, I Do Something Right conversation, right? A reminder, well, wait a minute, I did some right stuff here, and it was good stuff, and it was positive stuff, and it not only influenced me and had an effect on my family and my descendants, but it had an effect on other people. And I think that was an important characteristic and something important that he wanted to convey. So let's go on. Let's talk about. So that's the 39 chapters in Fenn's book and what I think about him. Bottom line on that is I'm not going to look for clues or hints in those 39 chapters. I'm going to look for clues or hints to the treasure. I'm going to look for clues and hints to Fenn, his character, and his personality. And I think that's going to help me interpret the poem that much better. Then Preston's... Pardon me?
So can I talk about enrolling now?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So, and it's a technique when you're speaking in public to enroll people, which just means to get them on your side, to persuade them that you're correct and you know what you're talking about, and to join you. So that's something that, of course, we try to do as well. But enrolling, in order to do that, you need to become vulnerable. You need to tell people, I am like you. I had this experience where I fell down, I learned from it, I got back up again. So once you share that with people, then they are more likely to say, oh, well, you are like me, I am on your side. So again, that technique is following with your, that it's him saying, yes, I do right things, and I want you to like me.
Yeah, that's what it boils down to. He wants people. What's that? Is there? You like me? You really?
Right.
He wants people. He's like me. He wants people to like him. He wants
his Sally Field moment.
Yeah. He just wants people to like him, and I think that's what we try to accomplish with this book. So on to Preston's Forward. Is that okay? So again, we are going to have to spend an entire show on Preston's Forward because it's very deep and it provides a lot of information. I'm not sure it provides clues, but it certainly provides hints. The thing that you have to look at Preston's Forward, the perspective that you have to look at Preston's Forward from is it's not Fenn's book. It's as diametrically opposed from Fenn's book as you could imagine. It's Preston's Forward, and Preston may have had a completely different objective from Fenn in writing the forward. So along the way, you find out that Fenn had this original plan, his original plan, as he described it to Preston, and Preston describes it to us, is that he was going to take this treasure, and if the cancer were to, that's not reoccur, what do they call it? If he was to come out of remission, what happens when you come out of remission? If the cancer were to return,
yes.
That his plan was to take the chest and go to hide it someplace and then leave the last clue in his car at either the Denver Natural History Museum of Natural History, or some university in Arizona.
NAU. Northern Arizona
University.
Home of the Lumberjacks.
So that was his plan. And then Preston mentions, of course, that over time he realized the rule of, in order to keep a secret, one of the people has to be dead. And Fenn could probably never, and I'm sure he couldn't, work out how do I implement that plan without having someone else involved in helping me to implement that plan. And that spoils the secret. Also, I think at some point Fenn came to the conclusion, I think this was more recent, that the idea of dying at the treasure actually is another way. You either give away clues, where you parked the car and walked up to the treasure and buried yourself, wrapped yourself around the treasure, or you don't. You don't do that. I think that's where he's at right now, right?
And people might notice buzzards.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of reasons. You don't do that, and I think that's where he's at. And I think he's mentioned it recently, that's where he's at, but I think he made that decision a long, long time ago, that he can't do that, not without getting other people involved or leaving a clue, the quote, 10th, unquote, clue, telling people, here's where you should be looking. So I think that original plan and any follow-on plan, we're now at plan number 3, which is I'm going to die quietly in my bed at home, hopefully with my family around me. And finding the treasure is going to be up to you. That's the last plan, right? The last plan is you're not going to find a body when you find my treasure, right? Unless somebody else found it, there was a fight and one of them shot the other. Preston also reminds us, once again, follow the clues in order. He doesn't say this, Toby says this, and that is, if you're looking for the blaze, you are definitely not following the clues in order. And we've had both Fenn and Preston warn us more than once that you have to look for the clues in order. Warm water salts, canyon down, however you see them, we know that the first clue is warm water salt, that the blaze is near the end. So if you're looking for the blaze and debating the blaze, there's something wrong with your strategy, because you're definitely not going through all the clues. And then the other thing, and I'm going to let you read this because I think it may be another show the same way. Preston invests a good portion of the foreword in Fenn's special place. And it was interesting to me not only how he described it or his perception of how he described it, but how he used it in the context of both the Codex and his conversations of Fenn. There is no mention of buried treasure. And what I mean by that is when Preston talks about what you're going to find when you get to a special place, whether he's describing how he wrote it in the Codex or how it was described to him by Fenn, he uses a couple of words that I thought were damned interesting. One of them was tomb, and the other was rob. Robbing a tomb, as in, Tomb Raider style, is very different from digging up a buried treasure in my own mind. And I think you could easily deduce from that you're not dealing with a buried treasure. It's reinforced once again. And then what you're looking for is a tomb where you'll have the sense that you're robbing the tomb. To me, that's not digging a hole in the ground. So I think that is a valid hint. And I think it gets us back on track when it comes to looking for the treasure. And I'm not even going to deal with buried treasure anymore. Buried treasure.
Okay.
Okay. And then, so I got to answer the question, why was the book published?
Okay.
And I'm going to go back to what I said early. Once in a while, I do something right. It was for Fenn. It gave Fenn the opportunity to remind people that, although he's led a life and that an interesting life, he's learned from it. And although there has been a lot of consternation, as much consternation as interest created since he hid the treasure in 7 years, what he wants you to remember about him is, I'm a good guy, and I've learned from it. And things I've learned from it have not only benefited me, but they've benefited my family and the people that I've come in contact with. And I want to correct that misrepresentation or misinterpretation, especially after he's gone, because you're going to have people talking about him. There's nothing worse than being talked about badly after you can't defend yourself. Right? That Toby, you're going to be standing over my ground and say, ugh, all he did was hog the microphone. So I won't be able to defend myself.
That's true.
Used to correct, again, he's trying to make sure that in the long term, that interpretation or representation, the perception or representation of him as a bad guy, somebody that created a lot of consternation, or
that he's some
to
kind
the
of
extent,
puppet master, did this
or
for
a
evil
guy
intent.
who does hoaxes, things like that.
Right.
I think that's why this book was written. It's his. I'm going to say it's his last book. Because it's the one that leaves you with a sense of who Forrest Fenn is, and it's a positive impression. So that I think it's designed to do that, and should end the debate. I mean, at least I'm sure that's what he hopes happens, that it ends the debate of whether Forrest is just another puppet master, like you said, or a hoaxer, or whatever. He's a good guy. You got to believe that he's a good guy, or he'd like you to believe. I'm not telling you what to do here. I'm just telling you what Forrest, why he wrote this book, why it was done in that way. So, next week, do you want to talk about that, or do you want to take Q&A first?
Let's do Q&A.
You got any Q's and A's?
So we're not changing the subject. Yes.
Okay. All right, let's go to Q&A. So make sure you precede your questions with AGK. Try to stay on topic. And we'll see what we can do.
And Steve Klein has donated $10 to Super Chat. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. That's
Keep up the good work, he says.
Yeah, we try. We're working at it.
So from Adam Foddy.
Hi, Adam.
He said he had to leave the question and then he had to go, but...
so you won't... Oh, okay.
So he won't hear it until he rewatches. Okay, so he says, Forrest Fenn has been quoted on Wikipedia saying that should the price of gold rise to the point where the value of the treasure reaches $10 million, he's going to go and fetch it himself. Is there any truth to this?
It is true that he said it. I think if you look at the way, the times that he said it, especially in interviews, I don't think he believes it. I think he said that in jest. I think he was making fun of the fact that for a period there, every time somebody talked about the value of the treasure, it would go up another $1 million. So it is true that he said it. I don't think it's true that he would do it.
Wayne Peterson wants to know how many of the 9 clues have been figured out.
I believe, I don't know for certain. Forrest has told us that he believes that the first 2 clues have been figured out. But honestly, in his story about the little Indian girl, the little girl living in India, he said that she could figure out the first 2 clues from where she was, but after that she'd have to be the equivalent of boots on the ground. I don't think he used that phrase. But sooner or later, you got to get out of your chair. So I'm going to assume, and he said as much, so I'm going to assume that he believes the first 2 clues have been resolved.
Okay.
There is no indication in the blogosphere that anyone else has gotten any closer, although there's a lot of conversation about it. But I believe the people that say they've got all 5 clues like us probably haven't, but are just talking about them. So.
And then Adam again.
Adam, I thought he's not here, is he?
He wrote these before he left.
Oh, okay.
In your recent blog, Toby stated that there are some hints in the preface, or I think he means the foreword, of the new book written by a third party, Preston, Douglas Preston. Does this not mean that this person is aware of where the treasure is hidden?
Well, yes and no. He knows that in his conversation, so we're talking about Douglas Preston, and what I think is the hint, and that has to do with Fenn's special place. He had enough of a conversation about Fenn with where he was going to place the treasure that he was able to write a book based on the same kind of conversation. So I think, generically speaking, you could describe Fenn's special place without giving the location of that special place. So I don't think he knows where the treasure is. I think what he imagines is what one is going to find when they get there.
And Sean says, do you see any significance in his omitting the 40th S-band? I'm not sure what that means. The subject matter of what I assume to be SB 179. Scrapbook. Okay, Scrapbook. Scrapbook and the subject matter. So he wants to know, do you think he omitted it because of its content, or that it had any significance?
No. I do think he omitted it because of its content, but it didn't fit the pattern of the rest of the book, of the rest of the chapters. The rest of the chapters are written in a style of parable and allegory, and have a reason for their writing. 179 is a simple lesson on how Fenn wrote his memoir. How are we doing?
There's a lot of conversation about the topic, and I'm looking for stuff for us. But I didn't want to skip anything. Okay. From Chris Bischoff. Did you receive a signed copy from Collected Works? Just wondering if there is still a batch of signed books available.
Yes, the copy that we ordered. So Dorothy is really funny. So Forrest and I had the conversation about first recording the event, and then it turned into a streaming, and he referred me to Dorothy. And the first thing that Dorothy said was, okay, you can do it. Are you bringing anybody with you? And I said, well, yeah, Shelley Carney's going to be with me. And she said, well, you're going to have to buy a ticket for her. And of course, the ticket came with the book. So we had to buy a copy of the book. And it is signed. But all the books that were initially published, I believe, were signed. The difference is some people stood in line after the event to get dedications. So our book is signed. I think most of them were. But some people have additional dedications because they stood in that very long line to get them from Forrest after the event.
Oh. Brian Schultz just donated $10 to our super chat.
Wow.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. That was very kind. Does he have a question?
not yet.
Okay.
We'll look for that. But Redneck Express.
Yeah.
What about possible hints in Once Upon a While from the drawings, images? Your reviews seem to focus on clues only from the text. I believe the cover may even have a clue, especially since Forrest discounted it.
So, again,
Talked about the belt buckle.
Yeah. I can't. I'm not going to disagree with you, and the reason is I think, and this is one of the challenges between how I look at this material and how someone else looks at the material. I'm not looking for clues and hints. I'm looking for patterns that give me a better idea of who Forrest Fenn is. And that's very different from seeking clues or hints that may or may not get me closer to the treasure. So I can't disagree with you, but my focus in terms of our search strategy is very different from that. And I think we tried to explain how that differs today. So I don't, at the same time, I wouldn't discourage anybody from going through each of the pages, each of the drawings, et cetera, and looking for clues and hints that could help them get closer to the treasure. It's not. It's simply not how we approach the problem.
But he did say at the event,
Book signing
event, he did say that he didn't do the artwork. He really just said something about he wanted stick figures, and that they went ahead and put his belt buckle on there, and he made fun of that. So yeah. I personally don't believe he had a whole lot to do with the artwork, other than making a few suggestions as to it should be stick figures and it should relate to the story.
And the implication of that is that if the artwork was done by someone other than Forrest Fenn, then they would have to know something about where the treasure is located in order to correlate what they're drawing on here to where the treasure is. So,
yeah. Mr. G, do you think Douglas Preston knows for sure what state the treasure is in? It's in the state of repose.
Yeah. You made that joke that night? State of repose.
It's in the state of repose.
I don't think Douglas knows any more about what state the treasure is in than anybody else. I think if Forrest had shared it with him, I think the other thing too is Douglas has a different perspective on this. The benefit for Douglas comes in A, knowing Preston, being a pal to Preston. B, I'm sorry. That's what I meant.
He knows himself.
Being a pal to Fan
himself.
and getting the material for a book that was a very successful New York Times bestseller, and having these conversations and being invited to sit up there on the dais with him. So I think there's a lot of other benefits that Preston derives from it. I think, like all of us, he hopes one day Forrest, in his advanced age, slips and lets loose some clue that nobody else has, but I don't get a sense of that's where he is.
No.
And honestly, I don't think Preston spends that much time looking for it. No. I don't think he's a boots on the ground, 5 times a season treasure hunter. He's happy with who he is and where he is, and just enjoys, I think, living vicariously through Fenn and Fenn's adventures.
I agree, and I think he understated. I mean, he underlined. Wow, words are not my friend today. I think he underlined his loyalty to Fenn in the foreword. Yeah. How he brought him up and introduced him to celebrities, and he felt, really like he was in the presence of some really important people.
And they were really important
and
people.
that helped his career to blossom.
Yeah.
So he feels like he owes Forrest for that. But at the same time, and that's, again, why he would promote the book and be happy to do that and say everybody should buy it, and maybe there's some hints in there. And
I mean, you think about it, if you think about it from the perspective that Shelley's just describing, Forrest is writing what he believes is his last book. It's the book that wants to change some of those perceptions and representations, and he's asked you to write a foreword for him. And it could be just that you're a writer, but Michael McGarrity is a friend of his and also a writer. So I think it's an indication of the strength of their relationship. But I don't expect that Preston is any closer to the treasure than Shiloh, or you, or us is.
Us is.
Is that bad grammar?
A little bit. A little bit.
Okay.
Okay, so Sean, do you see this book as his third act?
You know, that's how it was presented, the third, as a matter of fact, third memoir by Forrest Fenn. I would say if the third act is his last act, I would say yes. But it's so different in terms of how it's structured from the other books. The other books, Too Far to Walk and The Thrill of the Chase, are written more like memoirs, where there isn't a sense of Socratic learning from them. This is very different. This is a very different book in terms of the way that he wrote it.
Sorry.
Is it important? I don't have questions. Okay, so Shelley got an important call. Oh, it's from her interview this afternoon. So hang on. Let me see if I can figure out where we were. Let's see. Signed copy, Preston knows. Okay, so AGK, what was so this is a little bit off topic, but I'll go ahead and answer it. What was the deal with the story that appeared in the Albuquerque Journal a couple of years ago about the treasure solved near the Vietnam Veterans Memorial near Angel Fire? I think those stories have to be taken with a grain of salt. I think what happens is the media, for whatever reason, whether it's a death as a result of the chase or something happening to Fenn or books published, re-energizes their interest in it. And one of the easiest ways to create an article as a result, a story as a result, is to find a searcher and see what they're thinking. You know, there was another searcher that took, I can't remember exactly who it was. Is it Pam? Found her treasure in the context of Fenn that had a spiritual. It was a spiritual thing for her. So I don't put a lot of weight in them. And the reason I don't put a lot of weight in them is for all the stories that I've read about searchers looking in places like Angel Fire and following up.
Which one did you answer?
Angel Fire. Mr. G. I just did Mr. G.
Okay.
So I don't put any more weight in those stories about searchers written by the media. Nothing against the media. But I don't put any more weight in those stories than I do in anything else. That they're stories, they're people like us. It would be the equivalent of somebody calling us, and we've had calls. We've had people from Japan call us twice and ask to interview us, and we tell our stories in hunts, and they do a big Japanese style story on it with lots of information and lots about us. But it's just a story. And we're no closer to the treasure than the guy that's looking at Angel Fire. Beautiful place. I will say every time I see it, if you haven't been to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial near Angel Fire, go visit it. It's beautiful. It's very serene. It's soulfully refreshing, and it's dedicated to the 58,000 men that lost their lives there. And I was one of the fortunate ones that came back. So it was a great place for me to consider my fortune and how that war was fought and all those things.
All right. So is there any consensus on what the word that is key may be?
No, not to the best of my knowledge.
No.
Ask any 25 searchers what they think the key word is, and you will get 25 different answers, including answers that include it's not in the poem, and the key word is not actually a key word. It's a number written in the sky by an aircraft using, So no, there is no consensus. Would that there was. As a matter of fact, it might be interesting to form a crowdsourcing project. And the crowdsourcing project could be, what's the key word? What do you think is, hash out what's the key word in the poem?
Has Ronald Conley wants to know, has anyone ever asked if the sun ever shines on the chest? If somebody asked, I don't think he answered it.
so I have to untangle all these in my head. I think the plan was, there was a discussion over on one of the Chase forums about questions to be asked. And I think that question was one of the ones that was listed as, if you get a chance to ask a question, ask this one. And it was refined. They started with, less refined versions of that question, and eventually got to, does the sun ever shine on the treasure chest? And no, it was not asked. And I think it would be an interesting question to ask him. Maybe somebody could write it.
You probably would just
say
that something else entirely different.
I don't think he's answering. I don't think he's answering treasure-related questions anymore. I think that those are done.
And Sean, do you believe that both Douglas, Shiloh, and a host of those closest to Forrest do not search because of fear of finding it and being accused of inside information?
I think that's possible because, honestly, I don't think Dale feels that way. I think Dale wants to find it, even though he has a good relationship. But honestly, every once in a while, there's a little ping in my head that people perceive our relationship. We don't have as good a relationship with Forrest Fenn as people think we do. But I always think about, well, if Shelley and Toby find the treasure and plan to announce it, as you know, don't plan to announce it, how would people feel about that? Or would there be this big outcry that Toby and Shelley had inside info? So I don't know that they're not searching for that reason. I think they're not searching for other reasons. Mm-hmm. Shiloh has a good life. It doesn't have anything to do with the treasure. He's got a business to run, a couple of businesses to run. Preston is the same way. He's a well-paid author of New York Times bestsellers. I think, again, they live vicariously through Forrest and enjoy the notoriety. But I don't know if that ever runs through their mind. And maybe it could be like, I don't want to go looking for the treasure because if I find it, there's going to be hell to pay. Well,
and a lot of people are just like, no, I don't want to spend my time doing that.
Yeah.
So I imagine you've come across people like that when if you talk about the treasure with your friends, family, coworkers. There's several people who you will hear say, yeah, I don't want to waste my time on that.
I think if somebody were to say to me, I hid a treasure, but I left $2 million in the bank for you when I'm in my will, I wouldn't look for the treasure either.
No, why bother? So, Montemere. How do you think Forrest Fenn was planning to go to his final place without someone finding his car and therefore find his place?
I think that was the conundrum of plans 1 and 2. So plan 1 was leaving it someplace like the Denver Museum of Natural History. Plan 2 was driving to a location nearby and walking to the treasure and taking the sleeping, hanging out at the treasure and taking the sleeping pills. Plan 3, and those don't work out. You cannot do that. You can't do either plan 1 or plan 2 without creating two things: a partner, effectively, somebody has to help you, and you also create a paper trail, because you'd start thinking about things. Well, maybe if I fly to Lander and I rent a car in Cheyenne and I drive, so you create this massive paper trail. So I think that's why eventually, if you were Fenn and you spent as much time thinking about this as he had, you'd have to eliminate plan 1, which was the Denver Museum style plan. Plan 2, which is I'm going to drive to it and walk up to where the treasure is. And you end up at plan 3, which is I'm not going. It's not going to happen. So I think he's on plan 3 right now. There's no, you're not going, like I said, you're not going to find Forrest Fenn's body at the treasure unless Forrest has some magical power that will enable him to transport himself there.
Chris Bischoff, I've wondered if the state of New Mexico got tipped off somehow, even in the slightest way, by Forrest that the treasure is hidden in the state when they put together that tourism video. Well, Forrest Fenn didn't discover the Rocky Mountains until 2013, so...
I made the same mistake, and I think anyone would naturally make the same mistake when you read in the book, the treasure is hidden in the mountains north of Santa Fe. We've had this conversation a dozen times now in various forms on both the blog and our vlog, where I challenged Shelley if I were to hide, what did we decide was least
my
harm?
Purse, I guess.
Yeah. So if I were to tell Shelley that I took her purse and hid it in the mountains north of Santa Fe, A, would you go look in Wyoming? Would she go look for it in Wyoming? And B, would the newspapers report that Shelley's purse was someplace in New Mexico and that there's a reward for finding it? So I think that conclusion about how the state of New Mexico behaved, very self-centered, and it was okay because the information they had at the time was the information that said he hid a treasure in the mountains north of Santa Fe. And that has to be easily interpreted as it's in New Mexico.
Let's see. Do you believe the location of the chest is at a lower elevation than from the location of where you find the blaze?
Oh, that's interesting. Yes, but not as significantly lower. I don't know necessarily that it's 1,000 feet. I think because of how we envision the blaze, what we think the blaze is, we think that when he says look down, it's because you're looking up at the blaze, and the looking down would include. Now, it might be a matter that you happen to be at that point in time, an altitude equal or level with the treasure, and it's the blaze that's above you. So I believe the treasure is lower than when the blaze appears, and that you could be standing at an altitude equal to where the treasure is because you're looking up at the blaze.
All right. Fenn said to think big when thinking about the clues. Sorry, this is discernment for the soul. Fenn said to think big when thinking about the clues. Plus, we are told Google Maps is a good resource. Have you considered the continental divide for where warm waters halt? If not, why?
Okay, this is another big show. The answer is we have considered everything possible for where warm waters halt and excluded them. We are to warm waters in New Mexico, in the New Mexico Game and Fish Department fishing regulations. So everything else is excluded. And the reason is it's perfectly defined, warm waters, and it provides me a geographically exact starting point. No other definition of however I cared to imagine warm waters, all the way up to and including him bathing in the, what is it, Madison? No, I think it was the Madison, but he found a spring in the Madison. You have to expand the definition of warm waters or maybe expand your imagination. The reason I'm back to and will stay with warm waters as defined in the New Mexico State Game and Fish Department regulations is because it's an exact location. It gives me an exact starting point. And it intersects with the canyon dam every time.
Okay. Will you be disappointed? This is Chris Kirk. Will you be disappointed if someone finds the treasure and doesn't reveal the details of its location, thus never finding out how the lines of the poem align with real-life locales? Yes.
No, because that's what we're planning on doing.
Hey, you'd be disappointed. You live life. You go
I might be disappointed, but certainly not enough to become depressed over the matter. You know, I would just move on. Yeah. Say I missed that one and move on with life. But honestly, that's what we're planning on doing. We've said over and over again that should we find the treasure, we will never reveal where we found the treasure. And if asked, if we're in a situation where we're asked, our answer is going to be where Forrest Fenn hid the treasure.
Mr. G, a few years ago, Fenn did a clue a month on the Today Show, I believe. He seems like he only did a few and then stopped. Do you know why? Yeah,
there were two reasons. Number one, well, maybe it was one reason. He and the show, Good Morning America. Was it Good Morning America or...
The Today Show.
The Today Show. They both realized, so both parties, Fenn and the producers of the Today Show, realized that they weren't giving us any clues that were helpful, any clues that were really helpful.
And I'm guessing the ratings were probably dropping.
Well, it wasn't. I'm sure it was ratings, but the simple fact of the matter is, it ended when he was having it was the last one of the clues, And the woman that was doing the interview, the live interview with him, started harassing. Come on, that wasn't, you know.
She was never satisfied.
Yeah,
with
that wasn't
gave.
a clue. Give me a real clue. That's not a clue. What else? You want to, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it was the combination of that. Fenn, in the conversations that we've had with him, although he's not offended at the interview process, I think he likes doing interviews. I think what offends him is the amount of disruption that occurs in his life.
Right.
Because for those kinds of things, I can tell you, it's a crew of 20 with a big truck and several cameras and lots of lights and moving in and out and lots of traffic. And he's mentioned that in our conversations of the past. So I think it was the combination of the fact that it was just cumbersome. It was not something he wanted to do every month. And then the recognition that he's not really giving us clues that are going to be helpful. And in order to get the ratings up, we really need clues that are going to be helpful. And he didn't want to do that.
Right.
He's not going to give you any more clues than are in the poem.
Yeah. I think it was one thing after another. He doesn't like his things moved and touched. And they were doing that. I mean, they would come into his home and move things. And
what you have to do when you're
comfortable
shooting
with
something
that.
like that, because you really do, you know, you're shooting an interview and you
he
basically
has an
control
inventory
the
in his
location.
mind of where everything is. Everything's in its place. He knows where it is, where it belongs. And if it's not there, you know, what are you going to do? You're going to freak out a little bit till you can find it again.
Yeah.
And that's stressful. So it was just too stressful, I think. Let's see if we have any more AGK ones. Ronald Conley. Yeah. Since Forrest said that only 2 people can keep a secret if one is dead, do you think that he might have made an indirect reference to Skippy?
Skippy died when he was 50, which was 19. Let me see. He was born in 26, so that would have been 1976. In 1976, when Skip died, although Forrest had a very good... Skippy was one of the men that Forrest puts in his pantheon of people to admire, along with his father, males to admire. Skippy died in 1976, and although they had a lot of fun together in their lives, Skippy had a very separate life from Forrest. It was very different, and they'd occasionally connect up north, but it wasn't like Skippy was visiting him in Santa Fe every year. In addition to that, if you look at the timing, the difference between Skippy died and when Forrest got cancer and started thinking about all of this, and by the way, had acquired all these artifacts that would have resulted in the ability to do this, the time frame doesn't match up. I do think, we do believe, that Forrest did get the opportunity to perhaps share the special place, although not necessarily the special idea. We do believe that Forrest had, there was an overlap between when Forrest's father died and when Eric Sloan died. And they had achieved the age of 80. So one of our opinions is that when Forrest refers to don't go, when he tells you don't go to a place that a 79 or 80-year-old man couldn't go, I don't necessarily believe that he's talking about himself. I think he may be talking about his father and or Eric Sloan, both of whom I think Forrest would have respected enough to share his special place with them.
Okay. Well, we do have a few more questions, but we are out of time for today. So Toby is going to address those in the chat online through text, and we're happy to answer any more questions. So if you want to continue chatting with each other and asking questions at this point, that's fine. But we're going to close it up for today because we have another show to do.
Oh, that's right. We have a 2:30 coming, don't we?
That's right. So next week, we are going to talk about how to write a poem with a riddle. I think we said that. Didn't we say that?
I don't know if I got that far,
Okay.
but yeah. We're going to talk about the tools that one uses to write a poem that incorporates a riddle, and we hope that this kind of information will help you to understand, to analyze the poem even more deeply than you have already.
Yes. And we want to thank you so much for watching and participating in the chat today. Thanks to Joel Lewicki for being our chat moderator. And thank you to Dave Klein and, shoot, I forgot the other person's name. Brian Schultz. Dave Klein and Brian Schultz for your contributions to our super chat today. We appreciate that very much. Are we ready to close?
I think we are.
All right. Thank you so much. And for Gypsy's Kiss the Vlog, I'm Shelley Carney.
And I'm Toby Eunice. Thanks for watching. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye-bye.